Hello, you are in Exodus chapter 3. I know that you blew through Genesis. It was so easy. You understood every bit of it that you've gone back and read it a couple of times now. Maybe not, but that's okay. The goal is to get you to dig deeper. So just because you didn't understand everything in Genesis or feel like you mastered it, that's okay. That's exactly where you want to be. I tell people all the time, run from anyone that says they've mastered the Bible because that's just simply not possible. You can't conceive everything that God wanted us to know. But today we are in Exodus chapter 3. And this is one of those times when translations mean a lot. But also, this is the one that most of us have heard some version of this story. It's the burning bush. Um, and so we're going to jump into that. I'm going to read from the Complete Jewish Bible because it does a lot better job. And we're going to start to get into some of this where they translated God's name to Lord, or they just replaced every instance of his name or a reference to him as Lord. And so we always just kind of throw Jesus in there. Anytime we see Lord, we throw Jesus in there. But if you've never really studied the Bible or Middle Eastern kind of culture, you may not know that the Lord or Lord is a similar to us saying sir. Uh, it is not always a reference, it's very rarely actually a reference to the Messiah as much as it is a way for the people who edited the Bible and translated the Bible to push it more towards Jesus, 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 and take God out of it. Now, I'm not anti Jesus. Don't run away with all of that kind of stuff, I promise. Uh, but I'll read it, we'll dig into it, and I promise I will work on these 2-minute sermons that I start the video with. But some of it does need some setup. So, the Complete Jewish Bible, Exodus chapter 3. Now, remember, Moses' name in Hebrew is Moshe. So, that's why this will sound a little funny sometimes, but that's okay. Now, Moshe was tending the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law, that's Jethro, the priest of Midian. Leading the flock to the far side of the desert, he came to the mountain of God, to Horeb. The angel of Adonai, the angel of God, they don't have his personal name yet, appeared to him in a fire blazing from the middle of a bush. He looked and saw that although the bush was flaming with fire, yet the bush was not being burned up. Moshe said, I'm going over to see this amazing sight and find out why this bush hadn't been being burned up. When Adonai saw that he had gone over to see, God called to him from the middle of the bush. So God called to him from the middle of the bush. It's God. Okay. Uh, he says, Moshe, Moshe, he answered, here I am. He said, don't come any closer. Take your sandals off your feet because the place you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, he continued, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Yaakov. Moshe covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. So let's look at that in verse 5 in the New Living Translation. It says, do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father. So he says he's not Jesus, but we used the Lord in the previous sentence. And then in verse 7 it says, then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. But in verse 7 in the Complete Jewish, it says, Adonai said, I have seen how my people are being oppressed in Egypt and heard their cry for release from their slave masters. Because I know their pain, I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of the country to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the place of Canaan, Hittite, Amorite, Perizzite, Hivite, and Yitzhite. Yes, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen how terrible the Egyptians oppress them. Therefore now come, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you can lead my people, the descendants of Israel, out of Egypt. And I'm sure this shocked Moses. So Moses says to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? I'm standing in the middle of the desert tending sheep. He replied, I will surely be with you. Your sign will be that I've sent you will be that you have led the people out of Egypt. You will worship God on this mountain. Moshe said to God, look, when I appear before the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, they will ask, what is his name? What am I to tell them? God said to Moshe, Ehi Asher Ehi, I am, will be, what I am, will be. And added, here is what to say to the people of Israel. I am, or I will be, has sent me to you. God said further to Moshe, say this to the people of Israel. Yud, He, Vav, He, Adonai, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzhak, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how I will remember generation after generation. Did you know God's personal name was in the Bible? Has anybody ever said it to you or told you to look at it? There it is. Go gather the leaders of Israel together and say to them, Adonai, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have been paying close attention to you and have seen what is being done to you in Egypt. And I have said that I will lead you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of Canaan, Hittite, Amorite, Perizzite, Hivite, Uzite, to a land flowing with milk and honey. And a land flowing with milk and honey just means a productive land, a fruitful land. There's not actually milk and honey flowing around in this land. I always thought that when I was younger studying the Bible. It's like, why do we want to live somewhere where there's a lot of milk and honey flowing around? It seems to me it would attract bees. But sorry, sidebar. They will heed what you say, then you will come, you and the leaders of Israel, before the king of Egypt, and you will tell him, Adonai, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert so that we can sacrifice to Adonai your God. I know that the king of Egypt will not let you leave unless he is forced to do so. But I will reach out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders that I will do there. After that, he will let you go. Moreover, I will make the Egyptians so well disposed. This is the cool part about it. I'm going to make them let you go. I don't believe that. I'm going to make them let you go and be so predisposed toward this people that when you go, you won't go empty handed. Rather, all the women will ask their neighbors and house guests for silver and gold jewelry and clothing with which you will dress your own sons and daughters. In this way, you will plunder the Egyptians. There's so much here, and I love chapter 3 because when we hear the burning bush story, we think, oh, that's where God told him to go save the Hebrews. Well, kind of. I mean, technically, but also there's a lot more there. God told him, not only are you going to be able to do everything I'm telling you to do, but they're going to put all their gold and silver, as much as they can, on your backs to carry out so you have something to sustain yourself. He's providing for them in a way they knew was not possible. But that's what happened. So Moses has moved his flock near Mount Horeb. This is where Moses had the original burning bush experience and would eventually receive the Torah. We don't call it Mount Sinai until after the Jews have returned from Babylon. That's when they start referring to it as Mount Sinai. And some people will say, well, why did the name change? Well, names of things change all the time. Countries, Yugoslavia doesn't exist anymore. I don't think. I don't know. I probably should look that up. But Burma, Myanmar, those kind of things. Names of things change all the time. But it was also, like I said, very customary to call people Lord and Master. That was just a sign of respect. But Yehovah or Yahweh is the personal name of God, or Yud He Vahe, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Now, we've lost some pronunciation because the Jews started a tradition of not saying God's formal name, not pronouncing it. So, or they would say it, but they wouldn't write it. So there were no vowels. So we're not positive of the pronunciation, but most people agree it's either Yehovah, Yahweh, or Yud He Vahe, some variation of that. And the reason I say that because God is an office. It's like pastor or doctor or accountant. It doesn't tell you who that is. It just tells you the position they hold. So there's lots of false gods. So they believed in a lot of gods. So using the name really made it which God you're talking about. So why is it holy ground? Because God is there. You know, it's holy because he says it's holy. We don't get to make things holy. God says he is the God of Moses' father, all the patriarchs, and that connects it for him. So it will all be related to the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant with Abraham. So this land, Canaan, it's occupied by a bunch of different people, kind of a conglomerate of people. It's primarily the Canaanites. That's why it's called Canaan. But those were the descendants of Ham, the grandson of Noah. But this is also the cursed line of people. And we see that all lining up. So when we heard about Moses' grandson being cursed, that seemed strange. And we focused on the fact, why would you curse someone's son rather than them for something they did? And part of that is setting this up. So we see the connection to the Canaanite people and how Ham affected that by his actions. So verse 8 mentions 4 other people groups in the land, but they were basically smaller groups of people in this particular area. Now, the Hittites at one time formed a large empire. They occupied an area in Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. The Jebusites occupied and built the city that would eventually be known as Jerusalem. So that's the reason it's called Jerusalem, is that it was originally named that. So an extended period of silence is a major ingredient in God's process. And if you're like me, that is one of the least favorable parts of God. In my selfish human nature is I don't want patience, I want now. But silence is some major component of how he teaches us. So his preparation of us takes moments of silence, the cooking, the baking kind of process, you know. So as we read, we're going to see just how highly God thought of Moses. Moses is going to be elevated in your opinion way more than you think of him now. He was way more instrumental than we thought. In fact, we're going to see that he is a shadow and a type of the Messiah. Only 2 individuals have ever been mediators, Moses and Jesus. Those are the only 2. So we're going to get into some of that too. So he calls Moses his instrument of deliverance. He's using Moses to accomplish all of this. So the way this call occurs is a pattern for the way God will commission all of his prophets. And this is really important because I had somebody tell me once, I want to be a prophet. Like, read the Bible. It did not work out for the prophets at all. And also, every prophet called is called by God. He doesn't take resumes. You can't apply for the job. But also, one of the main attributes of being a prophet of God is the resistance to the call. If you wanted the job, you would be insane because it's going to end badly for you. So we shouldn't have that desire to do that kind of thing. And if God calls us to it, we lean into it, we go through it, and we do it. But it's also that God initiates the contact. Moses didn't reach out to him. You know, the prophets didn't reach out to be prophets. God reaches out to them. So the one chosen is either reluctant or flat out refuses the call. I did that. I didn't want to go into ministry. It wasn't the fun thing or the best thing, I thought. So but being reluctant seems to be a precondition. It'd be great if we were obedient instantly, but if you read the Bible through, every prophet at some point resisted the call. None better than Jonah, but they all resisted at some point. And third, the prophet is to return to society, you know, or wherever God sends him without concern for the opposition. How many of us is like, well, I can't do that because people will yell at me or people will call me names. God doesn't want people who are scared of people. He wants people who fear him and are obedient to him. So likely the prophet will never achieve even a modest amount of respect or ever see what has been told by God come true. Overwhelmingly, they either die or are just flat out persecuted the entire end of their life, but they never get to see what God told them would actually happen. So if you're feeling like God's told you something and it's not coming true or it's not happening on your timetable, That's okay. That's where God wants you. It's totally where he wants you to be. So God wants someone who doesn't consider themselves worthy too. And it's not self-deprecating as much as it is, I'm not worthy to be called by God. I do not think I am, but he called me. So I should be obedient to it. And he usually doesn't call people of great power and prestige, but he does call us to stand up to great power and prestige. That's really important. Likely the prophet, if God doesn't do it all, it can't happen. I mean, think about this. He's going to tell a bunch of slaves to follow him out and not die. That's a hard message. If I invite everybody to Six Flags, nobody's going to resist me probably. But if I invite you to cross through the ocean, you might resist me a little bit. So, and if you think you might make a good prophet, you're probably disqualified because you shouldn't feel worthy. Especially if you desire to be popular or liked. Not going to happen. It's our duty to carefully examine those who profess to speak for God too. This is why I'm doing this class. I want you to know the Bible, so every teacher, pastor, priest, everyone you run into that says God says this, you'll be able to check it. Otherwise, you might just respect the person enough to believe it. I've done that. I've spoken what I thought God meant, and I wasn't right. And I've had to go back and correct a lot of that. A lot of teachers have to do that because maybe we didn't study the way we should have studied, or God didn't reveal it the way we wanted him to, or the way we thought he did. Always study God's word. That's how you understand truth versus not truth. So I'm preachy today. So Moses says in verse 13, the people will want to know God's name. The Israelites had 4 centuries of living in pagan worship of the Egyptians. So they're going to want to know, what God are we worshiping? In perspective, the United States has not been around for 3 centuries. These Hebrews were there for 400 years. I think they all started acting like Egyptians. Wouldn't you? Once you live somewhere for 400 years, you already act like an American, and you've only lived here for however many years you've lived here. But you do it because that's the way your parents raised you, just like these parents did in Egypt. So God gave Moses a name that indicated his characteristics too. This is not God's personal name whenever he's giving attributes. But in verse 15, I believe God gave us that name, those attributes, because we couldn't grasp the whole concept. But that's all we have. We're never going to fully understand God. So he's self-existent. He's eternal. He's the only one. I can't compare him to something else. But then in verse 15, he gives his personal name, Yahweh. YHVH is how it's written because they didn't use vowels at that time. So how is it that this same name is present in Genesis? Because Moses wrote Genesis after the fact. So when we saw it in our study in Genesis, that was after the fact that Moses included it. Remember, this is not a day-to-day journal. It's not a diary. So the elders are the people's representatives. Basically, he can't meet with everybody. He's meeting with the leaders. So, but he sent them to the common representatives of the people, not the elite, not the main people, but the common leaders. Pastors, priests, teachers, and other church leaders are not mediators. We will say, well, you can come to me and I'll tell you how to talk to God, but you don't need me to talk to God. You need a mediator when you can't talk directly to who you're wanting to talk to. A lot of times that's in a divorce because you just can't talk right, or a legal case. God tells us you don't need a mediator. So you can come straight to us. Now, Jesus speaks for us, but not instead of us. Like, we don't have to go to Jesus to get to God, but you can, but you don't have to. That's what he's saying. And like all of us, Israel didn't want to change. They liked kind of their circumstances to change, but they didn't want to put a lot of effort into it. They didn't want to have to change. They just wanted basically things that were happening to them to change. They didn't mind being in Egypt and being polluted by Egyptian culture and religion. Most of the people living in the United States aren't offended by it. They just don't care one way or the other, maybe. So they didn't like the slavery part, obviously, but the rest of it didn't really bother them that much. So God began by saying Israel had to separate itself so that they would show them, so he could show them what proper worship really is. The dividing and separating of God's people is constant through the Bible, and it's crucial. So the elders needed to see that Pharaoh had a deeper hold over them than they realized, because they didn't think necessarily they were held. There weren't like whips and chains and all that. Like in the movie, it sounds that way. But really, they did it because that was just natural for them. They were just living that way. They had compromised their freedom completely away. So Pharaoh's refusal will show the elders that the only path is to permanently separate from Egypt. You can't be in a little bit of sin. You can't be in a little bit of slavery. You got to get all the way out of it. And what we're talking about here is redemption, and that's really important. So the elders need to see that the king doesn't just want their labor. He wants their mind, body, and spirit. Because remember, as much as Moses is a shadow of Jesus, Pharaoh is a shadow of Satan. His hold over them is absolute. And for the most part, they don't even realize how deep it is, just like for us. So God's going to use whatever means necessary to divide and separate you away from the things that he wants you away from. That's just the way he works. So we try to keep one foot in the world. It's like, I just want to hang on to this. No, you can't sometimes hang on to it. He wants you all the way out of it. So once we sever ties with some worldly thing, God will show us another area that'll be dealt with. I'm not going to work out my salvation and then I'm done. It's like, it's a daily thing. I'm always asking God to search my heart to find what I need to get rid of. So at the end of chapter 3, God gives Moses a prophecy with a command. He says, strip Egypt. God said Egypt would give anything to be rid of them, and God did it all, and Israel benefited from it. I mean, imagine that. He's going to pay them. And if in the world court, every so often, Egypt files a lawsuit against Israel to recover all of this money. Now, it's never been taken up. It never goes anywhere, but they admit this money was stolen. Even though technically it wasn't stolen, it was given to them because they wanted them to go away. So another God pattern was that God redeemed us from our servitude to our flesh and to Satan. That's the shadow being taught here. All we did was benefit from what he did. That's it. They didn't work it out. They didn't go to the Egyptians. The Egyptians were already ready to do it. They were giving it to them. God was showing them that it was all him, none of their effort. So another God pattern was that God redeemed us from our servitude. That is a big deal. The first verse of chapter 4 continues from the last verse of chapter 3. So yours may be one way or the other, but we're continuing that conversation, and we'll do that next time. I know this was a little long, but the burning bush episode is vital to understanding Moses's position in the Bible. And a lot of us have always just seen him as parting the Red Sea, and that's really all he did. But it was much bigger than that. We're going to see Moses, all the way through Deuteronomy and his Sermon on the Mount, which is the Sermon on Moab. So come back for that when we get there. God bless, love God, love people, and change the world. Now go share this message.